So, good morning, everybody. It's my pleasure and honor to be with you here. Antes que nada, muchas gracias y quiero agradecer profundamente a nuestros...
Give a heartfelt thanks to our colleagues at BAMEX. We have been working hard with them under their leadership with on the SDG, Sustainable Development Goal number 2, under the leadership.
Be in English. First and foremost, I want to apologize if this is not the most dynamic presentation ever. You can blame it on the 250 scientists that were here in Mexico last week because we had our Science and Innovation Week at CIMMYT. So we brought all our scientists from over the world also here to Mexico, and we had deep discussions on our strategy 2030, new strategy of CIMMYT. I also want to apologize that right after the presentation, I have to run away, actually to the state where Federico lives, who I sent, of course, his greetings and my greetings, and of course, thank for his leadership. As in Sonora, in Ciudad Obregón, is the Mecca of maize, and especially the Mecca of wheat, which I will tell more about in my presentation. With that, there is just one more person I want to thank, who is Schengen, who is as well a board member of CIMMYT, as I believe a board member or important advisor for the Global Food Network. So once again, thanks for having me here. The presentation is going to be a little bit maybe out of scope initially, as I come from the Maize and Wheat Improvement Center. Maize as corn and wheat as what you eat in the bread. The presentation you have asked me to deliver here today is about how climate change is impacting food systems and increasing food security. So historically, CIMMYT as an organization, many of you know or may not know, was created by the Vice President of the US, Henry Wallace, who decided to drive from Washington, D.C. all the way up to Mexico City. I believe it was a Ford back then he drove. By the way, imagine if a vice president today would decide to drive from Washington, D.C. all the way up to Mexico City. It would be a whole big thing. Back then, he just took the car and drove the road. When arriving back in Washington of that trip, by the way, Henry Wallace is also the inventor of hybrid corn. So when he came back in Washington, there's two versions of the story. Version one is that he picked up the phone, called Mr. Rockefeller and said, I was just in Mexico, I looked at the agricultural fields, and there's something we need to do. We need to support this with technical advice. We need to look at the corn and wheat, because especially the wheat out there has an issue with rust, and it's devastating for the yield. There's another, less romantic version of that story, that actually Henry Wallace picked up the phone, called the same Rockefeller, and said, my friend, we have an issue. There's rust in Mexico. Rust doesn't ask a visa. It can move all the way up to the corn and wheat areas in the US. So there's something we need to do about this. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. Henry Wallace was from Iowa. And so he went to look for a potential scientist that could come to Mexico to work together with Mexican farmers in Sonora, the same state where Federico is from, in order to work and see can we together find a resolution or a solution for that fusarium. Now, what is fusarium? You can imagine fusarium as COVID for wheat. Yeah? It was devastating. There was no resistance to it in any of the wheat grown. So they found a young scientist who actually had studied COVID for tree, or fusarium for pine trees. Now, just a recommendation, if you ever want to study something, want to give a recommendation to your children or grandchildren, if you study tree diseases, it's a slow career, right? You need to wait a long time before the tree grows. It's a long time before you can do your research. So Norman Borlaug was also waiting for his trees to grow and decided to come all the way to Mexico to research rust in wheat thanks to a Rockefeller-supported program. That same Norman Borlaug later on wins the Nobel Peace Prize as the only agriculturalist ever for having saved 1 billion lives. Why? Because he found resistant wheat, and I think my Belgian colleague is here from one of the networks where he's sitting, okay, over there. So if you look at the paintings of Bruegel, you will see the wheat comes more or less up to here when you see those harvesting the wheat. So if you have never seen the paintings of Bruegel, you can ask your colleague here to show you one. You will see wheat up to here and people harvesting the wheat. Now there's two reasons for that. People were a little bit shorter because nutrition was not as advanced, so in general people were shorter. But more importantly, the wheat was higher. What's the reason for that? Dr. Borlaug started to look after wheat, and he took the whole biodiversity of wheat available. By the way, that takes up today 140,000 different wheats in the world. And he looked at the different wheats and found wheats that are resistant to Fusarium, to that disease. And he took those wheats and sent them up to Obregon to see how high yielding they were. And those wheats doubled actually their yield. At the end of the cycle, one day he was very happy, came back to the field, and it was a devastating day because all the wheat was lying on the ground. Why? Because the head was so heavy that the stem could no longer sustain the heavy wheat. So what it would do was topple over. Call it a precursor of food loss, right? In the field, already lost. Until he found a dwarfing gene, put it into the wheat, made the wheat smaller, less tall, so it could again sustain the head and the weight of the grain and would not fall over. That wheat went all over the globe to India, Bangladesh, and Nepal, saved 1 billion lives over there, and came back to Mexico. And if you today see any wheat that doesn't come above your head, if you're not too tall, that's wheat that is actually developed by the center I today represent. Now, why I tell you this story? Because it was quite easy for Borlaug to actually say, let's give up, this doesn't work, right? You found a disease-resistant variety, and still it topples over at the end of the year. So there you go, again, looking for the next solution, because you just created a solution which created you a problem which requires a new solution. But he didn't give up. It was also a precursor of what you represent here today, which is the need for international collaboration. The impact of that innovation was made in Mexico, was developed here in Mexico, but it had its biggest impact in India, Bangladesh, Nepal. And I am a soil scientist, a biological scientist, and I would like to say that it was thanks to the biological innovation, but it actually was not. It was because Dr. Borlaug stepped up and called the Gandhi family and said, there's something I can give you. Will you please allow my new seeds in your country? So it shows the importance of accompanying any of those decisions with deep, deep dialogue between countries, between decision makers to make things happen. So what does that mean today? Today, at 45 minutes driving from here, we safeguard the biodiversity of wheat and maize. 28,000 different maize accessions. Now you're in Mexico. If you're only going to eat yellow products of corn, of maize, you cannot go home, okay? You should at least eat one blue tortilla or one green or one red cookie made out of green, blue, yellow corn. Corn is not yellow. It can be green, it can be blue, it can be multiple colors. The fact you believe is yellow is a big bias because you're not using all the biodiversity that is available. 28,000 different corn accessions and 140,000 different wheat accessions. And you may have seen on Nat Geo or the Discovery Channel that there's a big bunker somewhere in Norway where they safeguard all the different biodiversity for the world. Well, corn, maize, and wheat is a copy of what is safeguarded here in Mexico at 45 minutes of this hotel in a big bunker close to the airport. So if you want to visit, let this be an invitation. Today, CIMMYT is headquartered here in Mexico. We have offices in 17 different countries and projects in over 40 countries. We are part, over 50 countries. We are part of a network called the CGIAR, where there's other research centers that work on beans, that work on potatoes, that work on tropical agriculture, etc., etc. So a bit similar, I can imagine, I'm just imagining, to what you are. And if it's a bit similar, if you are a bit similar as what we are, it is kind of organized chaos, right? Everybody's doing what they want, but at the same time, we come together and have common learnings. Today, CIMMYT serves over 18 million farmers that are benefiting from the innovations. And we work in the nexus of climate change and food production. Now, agriculture contributes to 24% of the greenhouse gases. And a lot of that has to do, as you can see here, with the energy used, manure production, but also, of course, with rice methane production. And then you have all the other elements. So if we're talking about circularity, that is where your world and our world needs to come together, because we are at the two ends of the same story. And what is waste that you save, we can actually start working on that same waste as an input, again, into the agricultural fields. So for example, there's a big challenge on climate change. And just to give you a few numbers, each degree increase in the global temperature means a wheat yield reduction globally by 6% and a maize yield reduction by 7.4%. That's quite dramatic if you know that actually we need to increase yields to keep up with the population growth, with climate change, and with nature degradation of around 2.5% per year. Closer home, 5.8 million Central Americans, so people living in Central America, are in acute food insecurity during the period of September 2021 and May 2022. Part of that is conflict. Part of that is climate crisis. Part of that you're responding to by the food banks. Part of that we want to respond to, as many of those in food insecurity are actually smallholder farmers living on their land and producing part of their food for their own consumption. So I think we're starting to see the story that you have here farmers producing food for own consumption that then gets used for production later on, processing, and comes back. This is an interesting, all right? So what we can see also globally, you asked me to look at the climate change shifts. Basically what we can see here, if you look at the mega environments, you can see that those environments are going to change. So blue is no change. Green is changing to higher potential for corn production, while red is actually a change for lower potential, as is yellow, and lighter green means areas where there's new potential production. So you can see initially, the left slide here, there is some shifts. You can also see how over time there's more and more red coming into that. Now I want to take you back a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, we were discussing with the same companies that were on this slide, Kellogg, Bimbo, etc. on the one hand. On the other hand, we were discussing with Lloyd's of London. Who of you knows Lloyd's of London? It's the biggest reinsurer there is out there globally. And so we asked Lloyd's of London, is food insecurity, is a food crisis a risk you take into account for your insurance? And it was right after the previous food crisis. And they said, no, sir, it is not. And the reason it is not is because it is not a documented risk. Now that made us go bananas because we said it was just in the newspaper, it was just all over the news, and you're saying this is not a documented risk. It just provoked instability in northern Africa. We all know that the Arab Spring, one of the deciding parameters was 4 consecutive years of drought in wheat. So if you critically look at my organization, there were clear lessons to be learned. Because if those farmers would have had some of those wheat varieties that are more drought resilient, we could have had a different story. Now, they did not have those wheat varieties. So one of the elements that sparked that crisis in North Africa was climate change, lack of harvest, lack of access to innovative technologies. Still, Lloyd's of London was saying, cannot take it into account because it is not officially documented. Now, also in the world of insurance, there is a rule of 1 in 100. Every risk that is at least 1 in 100 years probable, insurance needs to take into account and needs to be ready to pay out. So we said, what is the official way to show to the insurance that this is a documented risk? I don't know if there's scientists here in the room, but you always are very proud as a scientist that you have an official publication in Nature, in Science. So of course we thought, well, it was published in Nature and Science. Was there a rude awakening? Lloyd said, I don't care. No? That's not documented. Or, my God, that's not documented, that's peer reviewed, that's like the most difficult thing you can do in science. We don't care. So we started with a group and we said, how can we show a 1 in 100 and the impact? So what we did was we took actually 5 events that happened, each of them, the past 20 years. And we combined those 5 events and said, what would happen if they happen in 1 year? They're all probable, because that's another element. It needs to be a probable event that can happen 1 in 100 years, and it has to have a huge impact, otherwise it's not worth looking. So we brought together 5 potential events that had happened in the past, so it is probable, with the difference that we said if those 5 happen in 1 year, what would be the impact? And what were those 5? It was a UG99 outbreak. Yes, history repeats. In 99, in Uganda, there was a new outbreak of the same disease Borlaug had worked on multiple years ago. It broke out in 99. It was COVID for wheat. There was no wheat variety in the world grown that was resistant to UG99. So COVID for wheat broke out and potentially could wipe out all wheat. What CIMMYT did was rapidly going to our biodiversity bank, find those wheats in the 140,000 that were resistant for that disease, crossed them into the wheat, and actually brought it out into the world. So no, you didn't hear about the disaster of COVID for wheat UG99 because it was prevented. Now, there's nothing so frustrating as preventing an event because nobody says thank you. No? Also, no donor gives you money for it. That's why we went to Lloyd's of London and said, what happens if we have a UG99 outbreak, we have an El Nino year, so there's drought on the one end of the world, there's floods on the other end of the world, we have warmer temperatures coming in, it all happens in 1 year, what is the impact? Now the impact would be that global production losses of wheat would be 7%, corn 10%, soybean 11%, and rice 7%. We went to Lloyd's of London and Lloyd's of London said, couldn't care less. So we went a further step, and we said that would impact our prices. Curiously, something you may have seen recently, prices would increase 4 times for wheat, maize, and soybean, 5 times for rice. Lloyd's of London said, couldn't care less. So we went a step further, and we said that would result in humanitarian crisis, food crisis, and a stock market loss for Europe by 10%, and the US of 5%. Lloyd's of London said, could care a lot. Today, that means that Lloyd's has as a documented insurance risk food security or a food crisis. That means that the same Kellogg's, Bimbos, etc. of this world will pay more insurance premium if they cannot show that their supply chain is resilient, because then they have a higher risk on their business continuity insurance. Why do I give you this whole story? Is because it shows on the one end that the food crisis we're living today was predictable, because we predicted it 5 years ago. On the other hand, I want to tell you this story because sometimes you need to go outside of the world where you're in to have the biggest impact of your work in the most simple way. What is the insurance play for your world? I don't know. But for sure, there may be one. Our challenge today, I call it the 4 C's. COVID, climate change, crisis, cost of living. All operating together. So in the midst of this, we need to focus to extend our climate change research as well to adaptation as to mitigation. And our research helped to actually equip farmers that produce the basic products for the food you're working with climate resilient practices and technologies, which are new high-yielding, heat and drought-tolerant maize and wheat varieties, increased nutrition and water use efficiency, and we measure clearly on farmers' fields. So said it simply, there's 140,000 wheat samples in a big bunker. There's 28,000 maize samples in a big bunker, like you can see here. And what do? We bring them together, a little bit like selecting a very smart woman, a very handsome man, and you want handsome and smart kids. Doesn't always work like that. They can also be, say it, doesn't matter, ugly and stupid, okay? It's your kids, so they will be handsome and smart, don't worry. With the wheat, we do the same. We want to make them handsome and smart by combining. Now, what is handsome? Very different for different circumstances, right? What is smart? Very different where you come from. Same for wheat. Very different what the wheat needs to look like for Mexico to make tortillas than it needs to look like for India to make chapati, or for Italy to make pasta. Same for maize, very different if you want to make a writing pen, yeah? Many writing pens today are made out of corn, or if you want to make a cornbread out of it. So we take those seeds and we actually work with local seed companies to bring them to farmers globally. 50% of the corn grown globally comes from this research. 70% of the wheat grown globally comes from this research. In the past, our focus was on yield, higher and more production. Today, our focus is on resilience and increased nutrition of that same corn. Many of the farmers, many of the rural population cannot afford to eat, if we go to Mexico here, beans, maize, and maybe a Coca-Cola is the basic food of many, many out there. And un chilito, so it tastes nice. And I'm not saying this I'm saying this, that's the reality. So if we can increase the nutrition of the bean, the nutrition of the corn, that's a first step before we actually go to processed foods and also, there's huge knowledge in processing in those traditional communities. We took corn to Africa. We took corn to the US. We forgot to take aflatoxin management. Traditional Mexican families do nixtamalization. Nixtamalization is a process where you actually take the corn, you soak it in water, and you put, who knows? Who's Mexican here? Lime, exactly. You put lime with it. What does the lime do? It deactivates aflatoxin. We forgot to take that to Africa. So there's a science based in the traditional way of producing maize and corn. That makes us scientists very humble because now we're all up in the air and proud about that traditional knowledge. That wasn't the case 5 years ago. We didn't even realize what the value was of that processing. There's specific short-term innovations like mechanization, improved seed, fractional fertilization, and post-harvest. Your post-harvest loss starts right after the harvest. We work on conservation agriculture, which is a way to produce corn and wheat so that it's more resistant to drought. It is also important to do, of course, agroecological pest management. Or the grain you will be using for food processing will already have certain elements you don't want to be there. Smallholder farmers lose already between 10 to 40% of their harvest right after the harvest. And there are simple technologies that can be used to avoid that, which is based obviously on storage without oxygen so that the pests die within the storage facility. So overall, this is our drawing. And where did we start? We started as an organization looking at seed. Today we say we need to start from healthy and affordable diets. And the affordable piece is extremely important. It is not difficult to make a healthy diet. It's extremely difficult to have a healthy, affordable diet that can actually locally be produced. As a matter of fact, what is a healthy diet? Is it different for those from Belgium than those from the Mediterranean? Is it different in India than it is in Mexico? It probably is, especially if you want to sustainably produce it. What is a healthy diet and for whom? When we describe that healthy diet, we can go into our biodiversity. We turn that biodiversity into functional crops that produce basic elements through seed systems. It goes to the farmer produces, has these innovations, and as you can see where we come from, that's the core of what we do. A nice production system. But more and more, of course, there's a piece for self-consumption. The rest, the surplus goes for trade, can go into the local market, national and global traders, wholesale markets, agro-industry, retail to the consumer. And guess what? A huge percentage of consumers are farmers. So there's a feedback loop over there. That's also where you can see the complementarity. My friend from Nuevo León, the carbon credits could be double value if we work together, because we can have carbon credits in the field, in the post-harvest right after the field, and in everything that happens after that. We need to talk, because if we take a food systems approach, that's where our two worlds need to come together. Now, also the food system approach is where climate change, conflict, post-COVID, and cost of living are hammering on several of those errors here. They're hammering on those that produce. They're hammering on those that transform. They're hammering on those that consume. So how do we bring resilience instead of efficiency into this story? Traditionally, we think about efficiency. We have done a lot to increase the efficiency of our food system. What is more important, efficiency or resilience? Likely you cannot have a lot of resilience if you're really inefficient. But likely also you don't have a lot of resilience if you only go for efficiency. Then it takes only one ship in one stretch of a canal to block the global food distribution. I'm not inventing it, it happened a couple of years ago. That's the maximum of efficiency. Where does the resilience sit in this story? Efficiency is reduction of food loss. Where is the resilience in your reduction of food loss? What happens if a crisis happens and hammers on the system is something we need to better map and respond to. And that is because there is, and so that's what we try to do here from our world, can we quantify how economically viable and feasible it actually is to mitigate climate change through agriculture, forestry in Mexico. And so you can actually see it is an economic proposition. This is not do-gooding. This is a deep economic proposition to increase adaptation and mitigation to climate change as a way to have economical development. So what I hoped to do with this presentation is one, yes, to create awareness. We are in a unique watershed moment. There is an office in the Pentagon that is looking at food security as a threat for national and international security. It wasn't there a couple of years ago. It is there now. I talked last week with the honorable that actually designed that office in the Pentagon, but it should make us aware of the importance for national and international security of food security. I tried to give you an overview and say we have been driving efficiency. By the way, let's first be effective and then efficient, because I don't know if you know, but it's not difficult to be
yes, is the order.
Yeah, let's do you.
Efficiently ineffective. No? Just do nothing, stay in bed, and it's done. So be first effective, then efficient, and under that, resilient. Last but not least, there's huge opportunity. This is not a black story. This is a story of huge opportunity for all of us that know system thinking. And you would not be here if you wouldn't know system thinking, because then you would not see the value in a network. So you are an inherent system thinker. Can we apply that system thinking, that scenario design to make a better world? In order to do that, what is the world we want in each of the countries you work in 2100? Do we know? Have we had the conversation with society, private sector, civil organizations? If not, let's do it. What is the world we want in 2100? People have told me, Bram, it's crisis today. What the hell are you talking about 2100? It's too far away. Those of you that have small kids, grandkids, nieces or nephews, younger than 10 years, very probable, likely will still be alive in 2100. It is not that far away. It is a decision on which horror movie you want to be directing. The essence of a horror movie is the zombies are released, right? That's how every traditional cheap horror movie starts. Traditionally, everybody runs and tries to run to the top of the hill to protect themselves from the zombies. There's a few that are very good at it. They build a big castle, they understand, they hide, and those are the 5 survivors, and then the movie starts. That may exactly be what's happening today in the world. Zombies are released and we are running for the hill. What would happen if we get organized and we send the zombies up the hill, build a wall around it, and we leave them there? Very boring movie, very interesting proposition. Can we do the business different? What's the world we want in 2100? What does it look like? Can we have an agreement, and can we make a tactical plan to get there? Now, look at your left. Look at your right. I think you have now seen the huge potential in this room. There is huge potential in this room. I have no doubt. Breaking news, we haven't fed one single person with potential. So I invite you to turn all this potential into a really transformative response to today's crisis. Thank you very much.